This meeting is being recorded.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the post-KubeCon November 13th edition of Gateway API Community Sync. As always, this meeting is governed by the Kubernetes Code of Conduct, boiling down to be nice to one another. So please do be nice to one another. If you have questions or want to interject, please use the raise hand feature in Zoom, as that helps us to organize and make sure that everybody gets a chance to talk. We have a fair number of things on our agenda. As always, it's an open agenda, so if you want to open the meeting notes and add something to the bottom of the agenda, feel free. Anything that we can't get to, we'll try to roll over into the next meeting. But so far, there's not a ton of things, so we should be able to get to everything. All right, I'm going to try to share my screen here. Success?
That's great.
All right. So yeah, let's go ahead and just go right on into it. Actually, just on the off chance, since we did have KubeCon and we might have some new people and stuff like that, we do tend to try to stop and say like hi. So if anybody here is new and wants to kind of introduce themselves or talk about like what they're doing with Gateway API, or just say, hey, I'm new, checking it out, we'd love to hear from you. We'll give a couple seconds for that.
Hey Shane, my name is Rob Menger. We met briefly at KubeCon during one of the office hours. Yeah, I'm just following up from that, here to hang out. Haven't been able to dig into the docs yet, but that is going to be my next task.
Very cool. Thank you. Yeah, thanks for popping in there. We had a lot of office hours time. We went 3 hours over on Thursday. That was pretty
Oh,
crazy.
wow.
Yeah. There was just a lot of interest. So, anybody else new or just want to kind of say hi? All right. Yeah, thanks for saying hi. We always appreciate hearing it. We also had I don't think he's in here today, but we did have somebody who was basically like an in-production end user at the office hours, which was enlightening and cool. And you'll probably be able to see his GitHub discussions he posted. He has like an eye of a dragon for his icon, and so he posted a bunch of stuff, user stories and stuff. Cool. Then let's just get right into the meeting notes for today. The first thing is to kind of talk about what went on at KubeCon. I'm sure we could go on and on about this, but we at least have two things we want to talk about. Rob, do you want to kind of roll with this for a second?
Yeah, sure. I'm fine to do that. Feel free to fill in any gaps. So lightning talks are not out yet. They will be soon. So this is just a heads up to like take a look at them. I hate to post a Twitter link anywhere because it's not the best, but it's the only thing I know of that is a summary of Tim's talk. And it's significant to Gateway API because he basically threw us all under the bus. Maybe not exactly that, but he said, service is the worst API. Here's all the things that made it rough, and then turned around and said Gateway API can solve all those things effectively, no pressure. So here we are, and it's really cool. It's a way to prioritize and think about a concept called cluster IP gateways, but this was kind of a stretch goal at the very beginning of Gateway, or what would become Gateway 4 years ago. The idea that this would not just take over ingress, but also kind of the front end load balancing capabilities of service. Ingress definitely came first, but service, capabilities are starting to pick up some steam, and Tim's lightning talk only seems to have accelerated that interest, shall we say. So I'd recommend when that does go live, hopefully, watching that one. It's only 5 minutes, so it's quick, but there's also a short summary too, which is just like 4 pictures of his talk, and that's all. Shane?
Yeah, just add on to that. Definitely check it out. He definitely signed us up in a way. There was a bunch of relevant talk, especially in the office hours we did at the KubeCon, about lower level networking constructs in general. And there's a particular group, I think, like F5 and the telcos and stuff like that are interested in things like egress, lower level networking things like actually a gateway being a router, all kinds of things just kind of floating in the wind. And so there's a lot of room for us to take over some of the things that are going on in service. My personal inclination is that we will probably end up with some lower level capabilities in Kubernetes that do this, but are born from Gateway API as opposed to actually a part of it. I'm not sure yet. That's my guess. Like Gateway API becomes like the staging ground for starting to tear out some of these lower level things, but this is all just up in the air discussions, things that have to be pulled together from all the different motivations going on, which, like I said, include some bigger companies doing telco type stuff who are interested in using Kubernetes now. Because as I understand it, 5G jumps to a lot of Kubernetes use cases. Like basically Kubernetes is in use in 5G quite a bit. So we'll see a lot more telco involved in the future. So yeah, it was really interesting. And there's definitely a lot of talk about like, okay, so right now we're kind of layer 7 with a little bit of touching layer 4. What's next? And the sky's kind of the limit. So just be on the lookout for conversations going on over the winter and stuff like that as we try to figure some of that stuff out.
Yeah, and I would say, I guess we're kind of talking about terms that may not make sense in, the idea of a cluster IP gateway is kind of this big blob of ideas. It could mean something different to anyone. But I think the rough idea is that imagine if you had a gateway and you could, automatically assign a DNS name to it, right? Similar to service. Imagine if you could automatically allocate a cluster IP to a gateway, similar to what Antonio has been doing in upstream Kubernetes to enable cluster IPs to be a little bit more modular and used by more things than just service. There's a variety of things in the space.
Forever, yeah.
And then kind of the last detail is imagine if our L4 routing story was a bit more stable and a bit more sensible, which right now our L4 routing story could be summarized as you replace service with gateway, route, and service, and in return you get traffic splitting, which is like not the best value proposition today. So we either need to add more value, simplify the API, or both at L4 or below. But yeah, those are all relevant to this topic. And these are all, different areas that are looking for an owner or owners. So if you're coming back from KubeCon or just feeling inspired that you want to own some part of this API or really help push it forward, this is a whole other area that, could use some help and investment. Hamza, I think you've got a hand.
Yeah, so I didn't check out Tim's lightning talk, so I just wanted to get some understanding. So is this idea that the service API would, over the long run, like kind of go away, and its job would just get distributed through other resources? Obviously, like anything that changes to the service would, take probably years, but is that the sort of like direction that he's thinking of?
I hate to put words in his mouth, but my take on his perspective here is that he would really like to get to a point where the front end of service is moved to gateway, right? So one of his biggest frustrations for a long time has been that service really represents both load balancing and a set of backends. And ideally, those would be different APIs. There would be an API for load balancing configuration and a separate API for a set of backends. Maybe service just becomes a way to represent a group of backends, and more advanced load balancing configuration lives in a place like Gateway. I think that's kind of the vision he'd like to get to.
Yeah, because like the gateway cluster IP is definitely an interesting idea. I just if you have that, I'm not sure like would the service load balancing get kind of redundant by that point, since gateway cluster IP could handle, L4 all the way to L7 type load balancing.
Yeah. I think that's kind of, honestly, it may be another 4 years from now before we're GA on that. I mean, hopefully not that long, but I think this is kind of a big long-term picture. I don't think we get everything all at once, but you can see how those individual pieces can be delivered at different points, right? The idea of attaching a cluster IP to gateways, the idea of reliable DNS naming system for gateways, the idea of a better story for L4 routing and gateway. All of those things can be delivered independently, but when you have all of them, you have the recipe for cluster IP gateways and a replacement for cluster IP services. But I think it'll
Among
take a
other
few
things.
steps to get there, among many other things. Yeah.
Yeah. And if you're particularly interested in like the future of L3, L4 kind of stuff, like I said, it's all kind of just conversations at the moment, but this is an area where I'm kind of putting some focus. And my goal right now is to collect the allies in this space. So please do feel free to reach out to us and say like, hey, that's an area that I know we have a couple of interesting like UDP route use cases and stuff like that right now. Please do reach out. We'd like to pull you into these future conversations as they unravel. Not quickly, but slowly over the course of. It's not like, oh, get on the train immediately, but like just keep in mind these are kind of the conversations, and they'll probably pick up steam as we move towards Paris and so forth. So that's a lot of stuff that kind of came out of that lightning talk. Rob, do you want to like get into, because there was a lot of conversations around reference grant, and actually I did not partake in any of them. Did you want to?
Yeah, sure. There's a Slack group, I guess you could say. It's not even an official channel, but if reference grant is a thing that interests you and you would like to help define the future of reference grant, by all means, ping me. I'll get you involved. Reference grant, of course, is the resource in Gateway API that safely enables cross namespace references. So it basically sits alongside the resource that's being referenced and says, hey, I trust references from this other namespace, from this kind of resource, right? This has expanded as we kind of hoped and expected it would, so that other SIGs are now using this as well. But they have graduation criteria that says, hey, we need to get this out of Gateway API and into SIG auth, into upstream Kubernetes if we're going to use this for something like outside of Gateway API, which very sensible. But as we've talked with SIG auth, we've gone through a lot of different ideas and brainstorming in the process. And maybe, Shane, if you want to pull this out, that doc in particular, it might help to just walk through. This is a proposal. This is not final in any stretch of the world. But this is based on some discussion from people with SIG auth, people SIG storage, myself, and others from Gateway, etc., who have more of the context on how this all started. But the end goal is for this to become part of Kubernetes built-in and to be used for much more than just Gateway API itself. A couple notes on here. One of the things that SIG auth was pushing for is they really didn't like how much trust was placed on the controller to implement this correctly, right? It doesn't really solve the problem of authorization that they really wanted to solve. And SIG auth in particular is really unhappy with the current state of the world. That is, most ingress and gateway controllers have read access to every secret in the cluster because TLS certs, right? And that's really an awful state. And so what they are trying to propose, or what we're collaboratively trying to propose, maybe if you can scroll up to the top, is 3 new resources. And this is a lot. This is a lot to process. But first, there's a cluster reference consumer. And this basically connects, I used Envoy Gateway in this example, but this basically connects an implementation. We'll say they're using a service account for their authorization to a kind of pattern, we'll say, and we'll call this pattern Gateway TLS, right? And it says this service account is implementing Gateway TLS, so it should be able to access all TLS certs that are granted are attached to gateways, for example. Then if we go back down, we need to understand what on earth that pattern refers to. And so this is basically saying this is a cluster reference pattern that says gateways that are referenced via, so references from gateways from this path to secrets are this pattern, right? That's what you granted access to above, right? So for gateway TLS, you can imagine that this kind of pattern would be included in gateway API CRDs, for example. JSON path is not the best thing, but again, they're trying to make this more generic and something that can work everywhere instead of needing to just magically know that when we say from gateway to secret, we mean this specific path inside gateway, right? So you need some kind of reference to the path itself. And then finally, you get down to an API resembling reference grant. But what that becomes is just for gateway TLS, I trust references from the prod store namespace. That's actually a much simpler thing that users would actually configure. There's a lot here. One of the ideas is that essentially, it may not have been obvious here, but essentially reference grant would be responsible for granting access to controllers. So not only is this allowing cross namespace references, this series of resources would also allow access to the controllers themselves instead of controllers needing, read access to all secrets or whatever the resource is in the namespace. There's a lot here. No need, this is kind of moving away from Gateway API over time. So understandable if this is not something that you're interested in, but this is certainly something that as it stabilizes, as it becomes part of Kubernetes in tree, is absolutely something that we'll want and expect gateway implementations to implement and support correctly. Yeah, that's a long-winded thing, so I think I've taken enough time on that. But any comments, questions, thoughts, etc.?
Don't see any hands up, but we'll give it a couple seconds.
Cool.
I just added a note that David Eads from Red Hat had also mentioned this in his talk, which I think it was a lightning talk as well.
It was actually a keynote. I was very happy to see that. Yeah. This is at least the second time Gateway API has been surprisingly mentioned in a keynote without any of us knowing in advance that was going to happen. I know Caslin did that a couple of years ago at KubeCon as well. Wow, cool. I didn't see that. But yes, thanks, David, for mentioning this.
Yeah, very cool. Lior mentioned he's not going to be here to talk about this, but he did want to move gateway status features to experimental. And I think we had an accidental merge of that.
No, it's fine. So
okay,
it was accidental, but
I was like, hey, I don't think we were supposed to unhold it, but it was pretty far along, and it's experimental. So
for anybody that may have missed this, a while ago we talked about adding supported features to gateway class status. That actually was included in 1.0. This PR that Lior just merged somewhat accidentally, just outdated the get to say it was experimental, even though it was already, like, the API change had already been done, and this got missed in that. So that's fine. So what it means is if you're writing a gateway controller, please try populating that, and you should be able to run tests based on it. I think that's already live, but I can't remember.
I didn't think we had done the test. I didn't think we had the test set up to run off of it yet, did we?
Okay, maybe
we do. Maybe I hadn't seen that.
I don't know. But anyway, the goal is to both populate this with the features that your implementation supports, and then along with that, be able to run conformance tests directly from here, reading this from your gateway class.
So your controller comes up, it should fill this in, then you can run conformance test suite, and it should just point at this rather than you needing to tell it what features. So very cool. And yeah, we did end up with a conformance test for this, right?
I mean, the only way you can do a conformance test for this is literally running conformance tests based on gateway
Right, I
class
remember
status.
us
I
talking
think,
about this.
yeah. So I think the
Chicken
inevitable
and the
thing
egg.
is, yeah, when this does graduate to standard, that will be the only way to run conformance tests
Roger that.
based on what's populated in gateway class status. Yeah.
Cool. I imagine I'll have some things to say here too, but let's talk about what's next.
Yeah, so Shane had a whole talk about this. So Shane is very well equipped to discuss
That didn't
what's
get
next.
recorded.
Yeah, sadly this year Contrib Summit talks did not get recorded. So we'll at least share slides, if
Some
not
of them
like
did.
record. Yeah, I don't know. I never understand. So I'll give my own view because why not? So first off, 1.0.1, there's at least one conformance test fix that we need to include here. That's in the milestone already. If you've run into any other problems while you've been implementing or working with 1.0, please let us know. We do want to get a patch release out soon, probably before Thanksgiving, I think. So yeah, just please, if you found anything that we've missed beyond that, I mean, I'm hopeful that that's the only thing we messed up, just a tiny thing in one conformance test somewhere. But I feel like there may be something else we missed too. So definitely let us know. Then from my perspective, as we've started to stabilize this API and we're starting to see more and more people move from ingress to gateway, we really need to work on improving the UX and upgrade process because this is increasingly being used in production, and we don't want this API to be associated with just an awful experience that people give up on and move back to something like they're more familiar with, whatever, right? So Gateway Cuddle is one solution to that. That is what Gaurav has been leading, but I think we're definitely working, or he's definitely working to split that out into multiple issues. So similar to ingress to gateway, lots of different people will be able to work on that and get it forward. There's, almost no ceiling to the things we can do in Gateway Cuddle, and I'm really excited to see that become, in the not too distant future, the default way for interacting with Gateway API. And then also Lior and Tia and others have been really pushing forward on ingress to gateway. And this is something that I think is not obvious because of the name, but ingress to gateway also supports other APIs. So for example, Mattia added Kong's TCP ingress, I think is the one, I forget exactly. But basically anything that can be converted to gateway can live in ingress to gateway. So if you have something that you want to include there, definitely file an issue, whatever. The other overwhelming theme here is that we have just an absurd number of things that are in the experimental channel right now, experimental or provisional, 16 different gets. And at some point, we really just have to say experimental's full. I think that's about now. And before we add anything else to experimental, we need to get stuff out of experimental, right? So that means experimental graduates onto standard, or it leaves the API entirely. I think there are some things in here that are very clear candidates for moving on to standard. But basically the idea is before we just overload experimental any further, we need to take the time to get what's in there stable and out to the next channel. We can't have perma experimental things just lasting forever. So that's been a big concern. But if you see something in here that you feel like, hey, I can help get this to the next level, to standard, or alternatively, I really don't like this, maybe we should pull it out. Either one, please let us know, because we are absolutely looking for help pulling things out before we add new things. Then the next thing on the list, I would say, that a fair and predictable manner. So I think I added a few criteria here. One being, what is the demand for a feature? If there's a way to show clearly that this is a highly demanded feature by many users. For example, session persistence was the #1 issue we had people asking about at KubeCon across
Over
the
and
board.
over.
So
You hear that,
yeah, I
Grant?
don't know.
Where you at?
Yeah.
I
So
hear it. Yeah.
Okay, good.
So yeah, that is a good signal. Then what's the complexity of the change? How much is it going to cost us, basically, in terms of complexity? I think Tim described the concept of a complexity budget in Kubernetes, and that has to factor in. And then kind of a way to gauge demand is how many implementations are signing up to support a feature immediately, because usually that lines up with the relative demand for a feature. These are not concrete yet. We do want to have some more concrete guidelines, but this is kind of an example of the kinds of things we'll be looking at to have a bit more predictable and collaborative approach to prioritization, so there are not surprises in what does get pushed forward in the upcoming releases. Yeah, that's a lot. Candace, you got a hand?
Not hearing anything.
Sorry.
No.
I missed part of what Rob had said because I had an audio glitch at the time. But yeah, I was going to ask a question about ways that we're going to get together and prioritize which of the gaps will be handled first. So, I mean, for example, the oldest one that's there is the, isn't it the policy attachment, meta resources and policy attachment one? And then there's at least one other that I know of, gap that's based on policy attachment. So, I mean, and that would be the backend TLS policy. So there should be some kind of ordering in terms of which ones.
Yeah,
we have to sit down and start talking about this and figure out how to make sure that we are giving everybody a fair shot. We talked about it a little bit at KubeCon, but we were in such a rush to get to KubeCon. I would be shocked if backend TLS policy was not something that came up fairly quickly, considering the momentum already on it. But graduating meta resources and policy attachment is
tricky.
Interesting at best.
Yeah, I think what we'll need to do there is if you scroll, you can see just how huge that gap has become. It's
enormous.
Unreal. I think it's a fun exercise. I think the thing that is overly obvious with this gap is that we need to split it out. And I think there's a core that is at this point effectively standard, and we should call it that. But there are other parts that are decidedly less so, and we should make it clear what they are. So yeah, that's my opinion here. But I think, Candace, what you're alluding to is absolutely critical, that basically before we start even talking about adding new things, we need to take a hard look at this list, maybe in the next meeting even, next week, and just run through this list and say, this gap, where is it going? Is it on a trajectory towards standard? If so, what's missing? Who can help us get there? And if not, maybe we need to just give up on it and pull it out of experimental.
The graduation criteria is going to be key.
Yeah.
Also, like Mike Morris mentioned in chat, there's a couple of gamma gaps. And maybe those would be something that would be brought back to the gamma meeting, or we would have a conjoined meeting on some of those. I don't know how we would handle that, but
we talked about this a little bit. Mesh has been happening for a while, and it's probably time to kind of do a roundup and see what, like, add / expand upon what the graduation criteria for mesh is for Gamma.
Yeah, but I'd definitely be interested in that conversation. Mesh has taken a bit of a back seat while we've been kind of focusing on the 1.0 Gateway API release. But yeah, kind of revisiting where we're at, what the path forward looks like, and what, if any, things the Gamma group can independently start trying to move forward to pick up some more momentum there now that we're at 1.0.
Yes. And with all of these things, we, the maintainers, are going to basically try to be in a facilitative role to start getting these conversations going and make sure that we get to everything. We do really need, for anybody who's already like doing one of these gaps, obviously any extra time you can put in and start like continuing the momentum, great. Allies that you can gather if you don't already have them, other people with a similar use case or interest, that will help to bring momentum as well. But particularly focus on what it's going to take to actually make a thing graduate and make sure that we update all these gaps, because not all these gaps have rock solid graduation criteria at the moment. That's something we're going to have to groom. So. Anybody else have anything to say on that? Otherwise, can kind of move on, I guess. But just basically expect a lot of communication out of us. There'll be more. We just got back from KubeCon. It's going to be a minute because of Thanksgiving, but there will be more communication on how we move forward with all these experimental gaps. Cool.
Yep, sounds good.
Okay. I just wanted to add on to this because it was kind of related. That talk wasn't recorded, but there was a talk called Gateway API Beyond GA, which talked about, well, it talked about the experimental gaps and stuff like that as part of a smaller at the end. Like, here's the things that look like they're going to be next, that kind of thing. Nothing was actually set in stone. Like, these are the things we're actually doing next. It was more about like communicating that we're going to try to do more of what we just talked about, like fair prioritization, transparency, and stuff like that. I'm going to probably try to redo that talk as some kind of recorded thing to some degree. But one of the things it included that I think would be really potentially helpful, useful for this group, for the people who join the community meeting and like regularly contribute, is a retrospective, which was kind of a small group retrospective, but opened the door for like anybody basically to kind of jump in. Unfortunately, we had like 4 people in the audience, so that didn't really work out. So in general, we had a few takeaways, which I'll share soon. I don't have them all ready to go right now. But we want to hear from you all on things that you think, particularly things that you think could go better, all the time. We always want to hear them. Like, this didn't go well on the road to GA. We're at GA now. I think this needs to be taken care of better in the future. So make sure that your criticisms bubble up. Don't hide them. Don't keep them to yourself. We want to hear them as politely as you can, but still we want to hear them. So please do that. Because that will help us to organize better and make sure that we are getting the best API out there that serves all of us and gives equity to everyone. So yeah, that was me just soapboxing for a second. KubeCon EU, the CFPs are due in like a week and I'm taking vacation time. Like, what?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was gonna say. There's never ending. I just want to say this because I try and say this every time, but as maintainers of Gateway API, we want as many people as possible to be able to talk about gateway related things at KubeCon. We can't guarantee anything, but one of the things that I think we've all offered in the past is to help review proposals that you might be thinking about and help connect people, because sometimes there are a couple people thinking about related things. We can help connect you, if assuming you both end up talking with us about ideas. So yeah, don't hesitate to reach out. We do want to help as many people as possible make it. So yeah, just a general note that if you're thinking about anything, if you can share it this week, we might be able to connect people. Obviously, as we kind of mentioned, next week is US Thanksgiving, and a lot of us will probably be out or hard to reach. So please, I know I usually wait to the very last minute to submit a CFP for KubeCon, but that's probably not a good idea this time. So yeah, yeah, that's it. But yeah, hopefully we'll see a few of you there, and don't hesitate as always to reach out. Yeah.
Yes, indeed. I think that's pretty much the end of it for today. Nothing else on the agenda. If anybody has anything last minute, please feel free to chime in. Otherwise, we will adjourn a little bit early. Going once, going twice. Sold. All right.
Yeah.
Cheers, everyone.